Subscribe now. Hit bell for political chaos. This one question about family secrets triggered the most explosive breakdown in live television history. What happened next will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about Trump's family strategy. But at first, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this systematic exposure of political marriage manipulation is about to transform how you view powerful families forever. The studio lights were blinding as Donald Trump walked onto the stage like he owned it, waving at the cameras, pointing at familiar faces in the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never met a microphone he couldn't control. This was his element, live television, millions watching. The spotlight focused entirely on him, where he thrived on chaos and controversy. Across from him, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat completely still, her expression giving absolutely nothing away. She didn't smile for the cameras, didn't wave at the audience, didn't engage in the theatrical pre-show performance that Trump was putting on. She just waited with the patience of a predator who knew exactly when to strike. But here's what will absolutely blow your mind. Stay until the end, because this part changes everything about political families. The moment the moderator introduced them both and explained the debate format, Trump immediately leaned forward without waiting for any questions to begin. Let me tell you something about Congresswoman Crockett here. He started, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescension mixed with barely controlled aggression. She's been in Washington, 5 minutes? And already she thinks she knows everything. Already she's making accusations, spreading lies about me, about my family. It's disgusting, really. If you're ready to see the most devastating family secret exposure ever captured on live television, smash that like button and let me know in the comments if you could tell Trump was already nervous about what Jasmine might reveal. Crockett didn't respond to his opening attack. She looked at him with a kind of calm, analytical focus that made Trump's jaw visibly tighten. This wasn't the reaction he was used to getting from political opponents who typically either cowered under his verbal assault or fought back with equal aggression. You know what? I think, Trump continued, gesturing broadly with hands that were already showing slight tremors of frustration. I think she's desperate for attention. Can't get it any other way. So she attacks me, attacks my family. Classic move, seen it 1,000 times before. Still nothing from Crockett. She sat with her hands folded, watching him like a scientist observing an experiment. Taking mental notes of his defensive posture and increasingly frantic energy, Trump's frustration was becoming visible to everyone watching. He was used to getting immediate reactions from his attacks. He fed off emotional responses, used them as fuel for even more aggressive assaults. But Crockett was giving him absolutely nothing to work with, and it was clearly throwing off his entire strategy. "Come on, say something," he finally said, spreading his arms in a gesture that looked more pleading than commanding. "You came here to debate, didn't you? Or are you just going to sit there looking confused?" Comment below if you think Jasmine's silence was already making Trump panic about what she knew. Crockett took a slow, deliberate breath, then spoke with a voice that was measured, clear, and carried the authority of someone who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. "I'm waiting for you to finish," she said simply, her words cutting through Trump's bluster like a blade through paper. The audience murmured at the response, sensing something different about this exchange. Trump's face reddened slightly as he realized she wasn't going to play his game, wasn't going to let him control the narrative through sheer volume and aggression. "Finish. I'm just getting started, sweetheart," he said, the condescending pet name revealing his desperation to regain dominance. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into by coming after me and my family." Trump launched into a familiar monologue about Crockett's voting record, her district, her colleagues, twisting facts and embellishing details to paint her as incompetent and out of her depth. The attacks were intensely personal, designed to humiliate and break her composure. "And let's talk about your so-called expertise," Trump said, pacing now like a caged animal. "You claim to speak for working people, but what have you actually done? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You're all talk, just like the rest of them. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happens when Trump mentions his family will absolutely shock you." Crockett remained motionless throughout his verbal assault, her silence becoming its own powerful statement. Trump noticed the audience starting to shift their attention, watching her calm presence instead of his theatrical performance. And he could sense he was losing control of the room. "You know what your problem is?" he said, pointing at her with a finger that was visibly shaking with frustration. "You're scared. You came here thinking you could take me on. But now you realize you're in over your head. It's written all over your face. Crockett tilted her head slightly, a gesture so subtle it was almost imperceptible. Are you done? Am I done? No, I'm not done. Not even close. Trump snapped, his voice getting higher and more strained. Then please continue, she said with devastating politeness. I want to make sure you use up all your talking points. Before I respond, the audience laughed. Not loudly, but enough that Trump heard it, and his expression hardened into something between rage and fear. He wasn't used to being laughed at, especially not when he thought he was dominating a debate. You think this is funny, he snapped, his composure completely slipping. You think coming after me and my family is some kind of joke. And that's when Crockett's eyes narrowed just slightly, like a shark sensing blood in the water. Hit that like button if you could feel the energy shift when Trump brought up his family. I haven't mentioned your family yet, she said, her voice taking on a new edge that made everyone in the studio lean forward. But you want me to. That's what this whole thing is about, isn't it? You can't beat me on policy, so you're going to try to make this about your family. I'm going to address facts, Crockett continued, her prosecutorial background coming through in every word. Whether those facts involve your family is entirely dependent on what you've chosen to make public and how those choices have affected American politics. Trump jabbed his finger toward her with increasing desperation. Don't you dare try to drag my family into your political games. I'll speak when I'm ready, Crockett interrupted, her voice cutting through his like a steel blade. And you'll listen, just like I've been listening to you. The moderator tried desperately to regain control, asking a prepared question about economic policy that both debaters completely ignored. Trump was now entirely focused on Crockett, his political instincts telling him that she represented a threat unlike any he had faced before. You want to talk about my family? He said, his voice rising to nearly a shout. Let's talk about them. My daughter Ivanka is more accomplished than you'll ever be. Jared Kushner has done more for this country than you could dream of. They're successful, powerful, respected, unlike some people in this room, and that's when Crockett delivered the line that would change everything. Tell me in the comments if you think Trump walked right into Jasmine's trap by bringing up Ivanka and Jared. Ivanka and Jared, Crockett said, nodding slowly. Yes, I do want to talk about them. Something in her tone, clinical, prepared, absolutely confident, made Trump pause mid-gesture. It wasn't aggressive or emotional. It was the voice of someone who had been waiting for exactly this opening and had prepared extensively for it. What about them? He asked, trying to sound dismissive, but not quite managing to hide the uncertainty that was creeping into his voice. Their marriage, Crockett said, simply. The studio went completely quiet. You could hear the cameras adjusting focus, the subtle hum of electronics, the collective intake of breath from an audience that sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented in political television. Trump forced a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate. Their marriage, what about it? They've been married for years. They have beautiful children. What kind of disgusting insinuation are you trying to make here? I'm not insinuating anything, Crockett said with the calm precision of a surgeon making the first cut. I'm asking questions that many people have wondered about, but haven't had the platform to raise publicly. Questions. What questions? Trump's voice had gone up half an octave, betraying the panic he was trying to hide. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because the marriage secret Jasmine reveals next will blow your mind. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her movement deliberate and controlled. Questions about timing, about convenience, about why certain arrangements were made when they were made, and how those arrangements have served political purposes beyond the personal. Trump's face was turning a deeper shade of red, and sweat was becoming visible on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. This is sick. This is absolutely sick. You're attacking my daughter's marriage on live television. I'm examining the political implications of a relationship that has directly influenced American policy and benefited from unprecedented access to power. Crockett responded, her voice never rising above conversational level, while Trump's grew increasingly shrill. They're in love, Trump shouted, his hands gesturing wildly. They have a family. I'm sure they do, Crockett said with devastating calm. But I'm talking about why that marriage might serve purposes beyond the personal, why it might function as what political strategists call a protective narrative. Trump started pacing faster, his carefully crafted television persona crumbling in real time. This is what the left does. They can't win on ideas, so they attack families, they make up conspiracy theories, they spread lies and hatred. I haven't made up anything, Crockett said, pulling out a small stack of papers that she placed carefully on the podium in front of her. I've simply connected dots that are already in the public record. What dots? What are you talking about? Trump's desperation was now obvious to everyone watching. Drop a comment about which Trump family secret you think Jasmine is about to expose. Crockett looked down at her papers, then back up at Trump with the expression of someone about to deliver a killing blow. You've made numerous public comments about Ivanka over the years, comments that many people found inappropriate, comments that raised eyebrows across the entire political spectrum. Trump's jaw clenched so hard that the muscles were visible on camera. I've always been proud of my daughter. There's nothing wrong with that. Proud is one thing, Crockett said, her voice taking on the tone she had used as a prosecutor building a case. But your specific choice of words in multiple interviews, on multiple occasions, across multiple decades, went far beyond typical parental pride. That's a lie, Trump shouted. But his voice cracked slightly. I can cite them if you'd like. I have transcripts right here, Crockett said, tapping the papers in front of her. Trump's hands were shaking visibly now, and his usual confident posture had completely collapsed. This is character assassination. This is exactly what I expected from someone like you. These are your own words, Crockett countered with devastating precision, and what I'm suggesting is that the marriage between Ivanka and Jared, which happened to occur at a very convenient time politically, may have served as a way to redirect attention, to normalize certain dynamics, to create what political strategists call a protective narrative around uncomfortable truths. Make sure you're subscribed, because Jasmine's theory about the marriage being a political shield will absolutely destroy Trump. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word of what had become the most explosive family revelation in modern political history. Trump's voice dropped to something between a growl and a desperate whisper. You're saying my daughter's marriage is fake. I'm saying it serves multiple purposes. Crockett replied with clinical precision. Personal, yes, but also strategic, political, protective, and I'm saying that the American people deserve to understand when family relationships are used as political tools. Protective of what Trump asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer and was terrified of hearing it said out loud. Crockett set down her papers and looked directly at him with the steady gaze of someone delivering a final judgment. Of you. And that's when Trump completely exploded. This is insane, he screamed, his face turning purple with rage. You're insane. My daughter is happily married. They have 3 beautiful children. What kind of sick mind do you have to twist that into some kind of conspiracy? But his rage was working against him now. The more he shouted, the less convincing he became. The audience could see a man losing control, and Crockett's calm demeanor made his breakdown even more dramatic by contrast. Hit that like button if you think Trump's explosion proves Jasmine hit the truth. When Jared and Ivanka got married, Crockett continued, completely unfazed by his outburst. It changed the public narrative around your comments about your daughter. It provided context that made people less uncomfortable. It gave you political cover for what Trump demanded, though his voice was now hoarse from shouting, for comments that crossed lines. Crockett said simply, for behavior that made people question your judgment and your boundaries, for relationships that don't follow normal family dynamics. Trump pointed at her with a hand that was shaking with fury. You are disgusting. You are sick. This is the lowest thing I've ever seen in politics, and I've seen a lot. The public has a right to understand the relationships between power, family, and political strategy, Crockett said, her voice never wavering, especially when those relationships result in family members holding positions of enormous influence without proper vetting or qualifications. Jared was qualified. Ivanka was qualified. By what measure? Crockett asked, raising an eyebrow. What made them qualified for top security clearances, for reshaping Middle East policy, for representing American interests abroad, for accessing classified information that career intelligence officers couldn't access? Trump's response was completely incoherent, a mixture of shouting and half-formed sentences as he lost all semblance of control. He was melting down on live television, and everyone watching could see it happening in real time. Tell me in the comments what you think Trump is most afraid of people finding out about his family. Crockett pressed on with the systematic precision of a prosecutor who had spent months building an airtight case. And isn't it convenient that this partnership created a buffer, a way to explain away uncomfortable questions, a shield against scrutiny. A shield for what? Trump's voice was cracking now. For the questions people were afraid to ask about your relationship with your daughter, Crockett said, delivering each word like a hammer blow, about why you spoke about her the way you did for so many years, about boundaries that seemed blurred, about comments that made voters uncomfortable, but that they felt they couldn't address directly. Trump was pacing in circles now, his carefully crafted public persona completely shattered. This is defamation. This is slander. I'll sue you for every penny you have. Truth is a defense, Crockett said with devastating calm. And I'm speaking about documented facts and reasonable interpretations of public behavior patterns that anyone can verify. There's nothing wrong with my relationship with my daughter, Trump screamed. Then why does the marriage to Jared feel so strategically timed? Crockett asked, why did it happen right when your political ambitions were becoming serious? Why did it shift from a personal matter to a political asset so quickly? Subscribe and hit that notification bell because the timeline evidence Jasmine presents next will absolutely shock you. Trump's voice cracked as he tried to regain control because they fell in love, because that's what people do, and then they immediately became central to your political operation. Crockett continued relentlessly, immediately gained security clearances, despite red flags from intelligence agencies, immediately profited from their positions in ways that would have been scandals for any other administration. They divested, they followed all the rules. Crockett raised an eyebrow with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this claim. Did they really? Because the reporting suggests otherwise. The financial disclosures tell a different story. The moderator tried desperately to intervene, but neither debater was listening anymore. This had gone far beyond a political debate into something much more personal and devastating. Trump's face was a mask of fury mixed with something else. Genuine fear about what else Crockett might reveal. You're trying to destroy my family. I'm trying to expose how your family has used marriage, proximity, and political power to create a protective shell around behavior that would have ended any other political career. Crockett replied, with surgical precision, "What behavior? Say it," Trump demanded, his desperation now obvious to everyone watching. If you're going to accuse me of something, say it directly. Drop a comment about whether you think Jasmine should reveal everything she knows or if she's already said enough. Crockett met his eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment. I'm accusing you of using your daughter's marriage as a political tool, as a way to redirect uncomfortable questions, as a strategic partnership designed to consolidate power and create the appearance of normalcy around a family dynamic that has always made people deeply uncomfortable. Trump's response was pure, unfocused rage. He called her names, accused her of being part of a conspiracy, claimed she was paid to destroy him. But none of it landed with any force. The studio audience was transfixed, watching a man come apart in real time while his opponent systematically dismantled his defenses. "You want to talk about my words," Trump finally said, trying desperately to regain some ground. "Fine. I've always been proud of Ivanka. She's smart, beautiful, accomplished. Any father would be proud. Any father would be," Crockett agreed with devastating politeness. "But most fathers wouldn't say the things you've said, wouldn't make the comparisons you've made, wouldn't blur the lines the way you have consistently over decades." "I never blurred any lines." "Then explain the Howard Stern interview," Crockett said, pulling out another document. "Explain the comment about dating her if she weren't your daughter. Explain the repeated references to her physical appearance in contexts that made voters uncomfortable. Explain the pattern. Hit that like button if you think these documented comments prove Jasmine's point about inappropriate behavior." Trump's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Those were jokes? Entertainment. People knew I was joking. Were they jokes?" Crockett asked. "Because you've made similar comments repeatedly across decades in different contexts with different audiences. At what point does a pattern of behavior stop being jokes and start being something that requires a political solution? This is ridiculous. You're taking things out of context." Crockett shook her head slowly. "The context makes it worse, not better. And what I'm suggesting is that the marriage to Jared provided a new context, a way to explain things away, a distraction from uncomfortable truths that voters were starting to notice. Trump slammed his hand on his podium so hard that his microphone jumped. My daughter's marriage is not a distraction. It's real. They love each other. I'm sure they have genuine affection for each other, Crockett said with devastating reasonableness. But that doesn't mean the marriage doesn't also serve strategic purposes. Political families do this all the time. They create alliances. They build power structures through relationships. The Kennedys did it. The Bushes did it. And you've done it. This is sick. You're sick, Trump said. But his voice had lost all its force. Make sure you're subscribed, because Jasmine's final theory about how the marriage solved multiple problems will blow your mind. I'm asking questions that need to be asked, Crockett said. Gathering her papers with calm efficiency, here's what I think happened. You made comments about your daughter that concerned voters, that made people uncomfortable, that could have seriously damaged your political future if they continued to be discussed. Trump was breathing heavily now, looking around the studio as if searching for an escape route. And at just the right moment, Crockett continued. She married Jared Kushner, someone with political connections, someone who could be brought into the inner circle, someone who could help reshape the narrative around your family dynamics. That's not what happened, Trump said weakly. Then suddenly, you had a son-in-law to talk about instead of your daughter, Crockett said, building to her devastating conclusion, a grandson to hold and praise, a family unit that looked normal, that provided cover, that made people question their own discomfort. Because surely, if Ivanka was happily married with children, those earlier comments must have been misunderstood. Stop. Just stop. But the marriage also gave you something else, Crockett continued relentlessly. A trusted lieutenant, someone family adjacent but not technically your child, someone you could give enormous power to without it looking like pure nepotism, someone who could access classified information, reshape foreign policy, and profit from government connections while maintaining the fiction of being qualified for these roles. Comment below if you think this theory explains everything about Trump's family power structure. The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Trump tried one more desperate time to salvage the situation. You have no proof of any of this. It's all speculation. Conspiracy theory nonsense. Crockett smiled thinly. And for the first time in the entire debate, there was something almost predatory in her expression. I have your words. I have the timeline. I have the pattern of behavior spanning decades. I have the positions of power granted to unqualified family members. I have the profits they made from those positions. I have the security clearances they shouldn't have received. And I have a marriage that conveniently solved multiple political problems at once. It's not convenient. It's love. Maybe it's both, Crockett said with devastating finality. But the American people deserve to know when personal relationships serve political purposes, when marriage becomes strategy, when family becomes a shield against accountability for behavior that would have destroyed any other political career. Trump looked like he wanted to physically attack her. His face was purple with rage, his hands clenched into fists, his entire body shaking with fury and humiliation. You're finished. He spat, his voice barely recognizable. Your career is over. I'll make sure of it. Hit that like button if you think Trump's threat proves he's desperate and defeated. Crockett didn't flinch at the threat. Threatening me just proves my point, she said calmly. You can't handle scrutiny. You can't handle questions about your family because the answers make you uncomfortable. And making threats against people who ask those questions is exactly what someone with something to hide would do. The moderator finally managed to call for a commercial break, but the damage was already done, and everyone knew it. Trump stood at his podium, chest heaving, looking wildly at the cameras as if trying to figure out which one to address for damage control. Crockett remained seated, completely calm, her papers neatly stacked in front of her like a prosecutor who had just delivered a closing argument that would convict the defendant. When they came back from break, Trump had lost all pretense of composure or political strategy. He spent the remaining time attacking Crockett personally, calling her a liar, a fraud, someone who would say anything for attention, but none of it mattered anymore. The audience had seen what they needed to see. A man completely losing control when confronted with questions about his family dynamics, and a woman calmly presenting a theory that explained decades of uncomfortable behavior through the lens of political strategy. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because the aftermath of this family secret exposure will change politics forever. Crockett responded to each of Trump's personal attacks with more facts, with documented statements, with questions that Trump couldn't answer without making things worse for himself and his family. Why did Ivanka and Jared profit so heavily from their White House positions if it was really about public service? She asked. Why did they maintain business interests that created obvious conflicts of interest? Why were they given responsibilities they had no background for? And why does it all trace back to family relationships that serve political purposes rather than public ones? Trump had no good answers. He could only rage, deny, and attack. The response of someone who had been caught and knew it. By the end of the broadcast, Crockett had accomplished something remarkable and unprecedented. She had taken Trump's greatest political strength, his family image, and turned it into a massive liability by asking questions that millions of people had wondered about but never heard articulated so clearly on national television. As the cameras cut away, Trump stormed off the stage without the traditional handshake, his team swarming around him in an attempt at damage control. But the look on his face said everything. He knew that certain questions, once asked publicly, could never be unasked. Tell me in the comments which revelation shocked you most and whether you think this changes everything about how we view Trump's family. Crockett stood slowly, gathered her materials with calm efficiency, and walked off in the opposite direction, leaving behind a political earthquake that would reshape how Americans viewed powerful families and their use of marriage as a political strategy. Within minutes, social media exploded with clips from the debate. Crockett's questions about the marriage being a political shield trended worldwide. Her systematic dismantling of Trump's family narrative became the most watched political content of the year. The questions she had raised couldn't be unasked. Was Ivanka and Jared's marriage a legitimate relationship that also happened to serve political purposes? Or was it fundamentally strategic, designed to protect Trump's image and consolidate family power in ways that traditional nepotism couldn't achieve? Whether or not she was completely right, Crockett had changed the conversation permanently. She had shown that Trump's family dynamics were fair game for scrutiny, that questions about relationships, power, and political convenience weren't off limits, and that marriage itself could be viewed through the lens of political strategy. Most importantly, she had demonstrated that Trump could be completely destroyed by the right questions delivered calmly and persistently about topics he desperately wanted to keep hidden from public scrutiny. The aftermath of the debate was immediate and unprecedented. Trump released a series of increasingly unhinged statements calling Crockett disgusting, demanding apologies from the network, and threatening lawsuits against anyone who repeated her lies and conspiracy theories. But the questions remained, and once they had been asked so publicly and systematically, they couldn't be unasked. Political commentators, investigative journalists, and even some Republicans began examining the timeline and evidence that Crockett had presented. Within days, major news outlets were conducting their own investigations into the Trump family dynamics. The timing of the marriage, and the unprecedented access and profits that had resulted, the questions that had once been whispered in Washington circles were now front-page news. The psychological analysis of Trump's meltdown became its own news story. Mental health experts noted that his reaction suggested someone who had been confronted with uncomfortable truths he couldn't refute, leading to what psychologists called a narcissistic collapse. The security clearance issue that Crockett had raised gained particular traction. Career intelligence officials began speaking anonymously about their concerns regarding the clearances granted to Jared and Ivanka, despite red flags that would have disqualified any other applicants. The financial investigation that followed revealed even more concerning patterns. Forensic accountants discovered that the profits Jared and Ivanka had made from their government positions exceeded what had been publicly reported, including business deals that seemed to be directly connected to their access to foreign leaders and classified information. The political impact was equally dramatic. Trump's approval ratings dropped significantly among suburban voters, particularly women, who found Crockett's questions about family dynamics and inappropriate behavior resonating with their own concerns about power and accountability. The transformation in how Americans viewed political families was perhaps the most significant long-term impact of the debate. The questions Crockett had raised about strategic marriages, protective narratives, and monetized nepotism became standard ways of analyzing political dynasties. Citizens began demanding more transparency about family relationships, financial arrangements, and the qualifications of family members who received government positions. The era of simply accepting nepotism as a normal part of politics began to end. Most importantly, Crockett had demonstrated that even the most powerful political figures could be held accountable through systematic questioning, thorough preparation, and the courage to ask uncomfortable questions about topics they preferred to keep hidden. If this explosive revelation of family marriage secrets has shown you how powerful families use personal relationships as political weapons, and how the right questions can expose even the most carefully constructed public images, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. And this is exactly what happened after Trump's meltdown. The investigation into family corruption that followed will absolutely blow your mind. Click the link to see how Jasmine's courage to ask forbidden questions triggered the biggest family scandal in political history. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that in politics, sometimes the most personal relationships serve the most strategic purposes.